She was gifted to a rival alien prince as a peace offering, a woman who never volunteered, and a man who was never truly free. They met under a performance of unity carefully staged, while rebellion was whispered in secret codes hidden beneath a dinner plate. And yes, somewhere within all of that, it slowly became a love story. But not the gentle, glowing kind. It was the kind of love that stands before a galactic council, speaks the truth, and dares the entire universe to listen. If you want to know what happens when love becomes a political act, then stay. Because you're going to want to hear how this ends. If you ask Mira Dalton when exactly she became galactic property, she could point to the moment her signature finished curling into the last line of the treaty compliance document. Not a second before, not a second after. The digital pen still warm in her fingers, the soft chime of legal affirmation ringing like a wedding bell forged in bureaucratic hell. She'd been many things in her life: child prodigy, xenolinguist, negotiator, diplomat, but this was the first time she'd officially become a symbol. A living, breathing emblem of peace, unity, and mutual reproductive cooperation, as the legalese had tastefully put it. Which was ironic, considering she had zero intention of cooperating with anything that involved breeding. You'll be remembered, President Imari had told her with that grim but heroic look leaders adopt when they are selling someone else's body to preserve their policies. History only remembers those brave enough to sacrifice for peace. Mira had wanted to say, history also remembers tyrants, assassins, and people who accidentally start plagues, but she had already learned long ago that sarcasm was a diplomatic tool best reserved for species that didn't incinerate you when offended. And so here she was, 10 days later, on an interstellar diplomatic cruiser heading toward Verran, the capital planet of the Verran Dominion, a race of bioengineered humanoids once responsible for the deaths of over 20 million human soldiers in the Outer Collapse War, but no hard feelings, right? The crew of the emissary's oath treated her with a reverence usually reserved for saints or warheads. They gave her quarters big enough for an ambassador, stocked with perfumes and silks and ceremonial gowns imported from every friendly world, which meant they were both beautiful and impractical. The whole ship felt like it was trying too hard to say you are important and cherished while quietly implying and also property. Mira lay on the memory foam sleeping slab, staring at the curved ceiling as it displayed a soothing holographic night sky, Earth's, because someone thought nostalgia was sexy. You know this is madness, she said aloud to no one. The voice assistant responded dutifully. Please clarify. Which portion of the treaty arrangement would you like to review? The part where I'm being gift-wrapped like a peace offering to a warlord who probably drinks spinal fluid for breakfast. Clause 38. All parties agree to a ceremonial union for the purpose of symbolic consolidation. Physical consummation is not legally required unless both parties consent. Wow, she said. So progressive. She rolled over and groaned. She didn't hate the idea of marriage. She hated the idea of this marriage. To a man, if he could even be called that, who belonged to a race genetically designed for warfare, governed by a monarchy that had historically treated diplomacy the way toddlers treated porcelain. The Verran had wiped out 3 Terran colonies without blinking and only stopped when the cost of human counterattacks made further slaughter economically inconvenient. And now, after 17 years of attrition and slow burn horror, they wanted peace. Or rather, they wanted the illusion of peace. Hence, the bride. She wasn't even supposed to be the one. The original choice had been a senator's daughter named Alicia Kestrel, beautiful, demure, and trained from birth to smile diplomatically at creatures twice her size. But then Alicia got caught in a minor scandal involving an off-world entertainer and a jetpack in zero gravity. Suddenly, Mira, who had scored highest in Verran linguistic and cultural decoding simulations, looked like a safer option. Less glamorous, more controllable. Congratulations, her superior at the Department of Interstellar Affairs had said, trying not to sound like he was condemning her to death. You're fluent in Verran etiquette, and your psychological profile suggests high tolerance for confined spaces and emotional detachment. You're perfect. She wasn't perfect. But she was tired. The descent into VA. Mira walked toward him, her steps deliberate, her heels clicking on the polished obsidian floor. Let's start simple. Why are you up there, and why am I down here? Kael tilted his head. Because I was born up here. And you weren't. It wasn't an answer. It was a deflection with royal flourish. She reached the steps but didn't climb them. Instead, she stared up at him with arms folded and posture firm. You're not actually in charge here, are you? He gave her a faint, humorless smile. Did the gilded cage not give it away? No, I figured you might just like symmetry. Kael descended the steps like a man walking into a battle he didn't believe he'd win. What do you know about Verran internal governance? Mira tapped her temple. Enough to pass a dozen diplomatic assessments, impress my professor at the academy, and lose a bar bet with a drunken Verran historian. But none of that prepared me for being someone's bride. He winced slightly at the word. Yes, well. You're not really a bride. Oh, thank God. You're a justification. He walked past her, waving a hand at a column that blinked and opened into a hallway Mira hadn't noticed. She followed him. The corridor was narrower, quieter. The bioluminescence here was subdued, no ceremony, just practicality. She was already learning the difference. After the war ended, he continued, the Dominion needed a way to show peace without admitting defeat. A political marriage is ideal, ancestral, symbolic, dramatic. Our people love that. Yours do too, apparently. Mine tried to send a senator's daughter. But she got caught riding a pop star in 0G. Kael blinked again. That's vivid. They went with me because I was competent and politically expendable. He nodded. They went with me because I was disobedient and politically inconvenient. Mira stopped walking. Wait, so, this whole marriage arrangement was punishment? Not punishment. Reassignment. He turned to face her. You see, Mira Dalton, I'm not the heir to the throne. I'm the refusal. I disagreed with the war. Publicly. Loudly. And when the casualties mounted and the costs became too high, my father needed someone to display as a willing participant in peace. Someone close to the bloodline, but far enough to be disposable. And you didn't resist. I did. Then I stopped. Resistance only works when someone's listening. They reached a smaller chamber, furnished in warm metals and low chairs, Kael's private quarters. The design was strangely minimalist for a prince. No decadence. Just function. The only personal item visible was a carved sculpture on the wall, two serpents coiled in a knot, each biting the other's tail. That's subtle, Mira said, pointing. It's called endurance through consumption. A metaphor for Verran monarchy. I would have called it dysfunctional family portrait. Kael let out the faintest laugh, a sound so small it felt like contraband. She sat without asking permission. That in itself was a test, and he didn't flinch. So she leaned in. Tell me something true. Not diplomatic. Not rehearsed. Something that wasn't on my briefing. Kael studied her. His pale eyes flicked from hers to her mouth, then back. Not with lust. With calculation. You're not what I expected. That's vague. He nodded. Exactly. She exhaled, annoyed and curious in equal measure. Fine. I'll start. Truth, I didn't come here to change your people. I came here to survive mine. That earned a full pause from him. I watched 3 administrations sign treaties that meant nothing, she continued. I watched my colleagues get reassigned, ignored, demoted, or worse because they spoke the wrong truth at the wrong time. When they offered me this post, it wasn't an honor. It was a very elegant way to disappear me from the Earthside conversation. Kael's expression didn't change, but his shoulders eased slightly. Then we are well matched, you and I. As political decoys. As witnesses to failure. She leaned back. Charming. That evening, Mira was given her official residence, an opulent suite with too many doors, too. Dinner was served in absolute silence, which, Mira figured, was an impressive feat considering the 11 people in the room and the fact that at least 4 of them were probably carrying ceremonial blades. But no one said a word. Not Kael. Not the attendants. Not even the food, which shimmered faintly under the crystalline lighting like it had opinions but had learned better than to voice them. Mira sat across from Kael at a low, glassy table that gave the illusion of floating. Between them was a tray of bioluminescent root segments that looked like the tentacles of a deeply shy octopus. A side dish emitted gentle warmth, possibly through photosynthesis. A fork-shaped tool had been provided, but she had yet to identify anything that could be pierced. This was her 3rd ceremonial meal since arriving, and she was beginning to suspect the meals weren't meant to be eaten so much as endured. Kael raised his glass, a bulbous stemless thing that resembled a crystal heart with separation anxiety, and inclined his head. "May the right bring unity?" Mira echoed, "May the right bring unity," and took a sip of whatever passed for wine in Verran society. It tasted faintly of basil and battery acid. So far, not the worst thing she'd had in the name of peace. They chewed, swallowed, and sat. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. It was the sort of dinner that could be used to interrogate diplomats without violating interstellar treaties. Mira cleared her throat. "So, is it always like this?" Kael didn't look up from his plate. "Like what?" "This formal. This quiet. This, funereal." He hesitated, then set his eating tool down. "You're not eating." "I'm studying." He quirked an eyebrow. "The food. The message." She gestured to the plate. "You don't just serve symbolic food unless you're trying to say something." Kael smiled faintly. "And what is it saying to you?" "That your culture is either incredibly repressed or secretly hilarious." "Possibly both." "I'll take that as a compliment." Mira pushed a glowing root segment aside and revealed a faint symbol engraved into the underside of the plate, barely visible, no more than a few etched lines. Her eyes narrowed. "Was that already there?" Kael reached for his glass. "Probably." "You didn't answer the question." "I did. Just not with words." Back in her suite, Mira scanned the plate with her tablet after the dinner staff retrieved it, an excuse that involved her claiming human customs required ritual sanitization. It wasn't even a lie. Humans did love ritualizing cleanliness. It was how they invented religion and indoor plumbing. The scan was slow. Verran ceramics were layered with refractive materials to resist sensor penetration, more art than plateware, and more secure than most embassy firewalls. The symbol was there. And not just decorative. It was a variant of a Verran familial cipher, an obsolete encoding system used before the Dominion adopted centralized encryption protocols. The kind of system you'd only know existed if you'd studied the private linguistics of old Verran noble houses for 3 years, been bored enough to dig through their sub-Semitic genealogy, and had nothing better to do during your assigned planetary lockdown. So, yes, Mira knew it. She decoded it line by line, until the words surfaced. "They watch. Not them all. Some with hope." She stared. Then blinked. Then stared again. And for the first time since arriving on Verran Thal, Mira Dalton felt something unexpected, curiosity. This wasn't a decorative glyph. This was a message. Left for her. During a state dinner. In a dining service item inspected and approved by the Dominion's ceremonial office. Which meant it either bypassed every security check known to either species, or Kael Verran was playing a game far more dangerous than he let on. The man was a cage with legs. And Mira was beginning to suspect he didn't just want to break out, he wanted her to help him pick the lock. Over the next 3 days, Mira found 5 more coded symbols, one hidden under a piece of ceremonial furniture, one stitched into the hem-o. Then, in the soft, restrained voice of a prince raised in constraint and bred for diplomacy, he replied, "Then let's be remembered for that." There was no such thing as privacy in the royal compound. That was something Mira had accepted within the first 2 days, along with the fact that her diplomatic robes were engineered to stiffen under stress, a truly unnecessary feature unless the designers thought high-tension fabrics conveyed moral strength. But what took longer to accept was this: Kael Verran was just as imprisoned as she was. His cell was simply better decorated. They didn't talk about it directly. It wasn't the kind of thing that made it into casual conversation, past the ceremonial wine jelly. And by the way, how long have you been emotionally blackmailed by your entire government? But it hovered between them like static in the air, sparking whenever their eyes met too long or when the silences got too heavy. The rehearsals for the binding rite were held in what the Dominion called the Echo Hall, a dome of sonic reflective alloy designed to amplify ceremonial speech into harmonic resonance. It was a fancy way of saying that everything you said in that room came back to haunt you, twice as loud and with worse timing, which was appropriate, Mira figured, for a fake wedding. Again, the ritual warden said, tapping her staff. Kael and Mira raised their hands, palms out, fingers aligned. The energy bands activated between them, sending thin gold light across their skin. I, Kael Verran, of the Verran Dominion, Kael intoned, stand before the legacy of fire and renewal. I accept the accord. I accept the bond. I accept the emissary. He said it like he was reciting the instruction manual for a space heater. I, Mira Dalton, of the Earth Alliance, she echoed, receive the legacy, receive the bond, receive the vow. The bands pulsed. The silence returned. The warden tapped her staff again. Tone is flat. Harmonics unstable. Reset positions. Kael muttered something in Verran under his breath. Mira, without looking at him, said, if that was a curse word, I agree with it. His lips twitched, almost a smile. They tried again. And again. By the 5th attempt, Mira's fingers were starting to go numb and her sense of sarcasm had gone into emergency reserves. Kael, she whispered through clenched teeth, tell me you're at least enjoying this as much as I am. I'm enjoying it more, he said blandly. You don't have to wear the throat coil during the rite. I was told that was ornamental. It's ceremonial. And painful. I'm suddenly less excited about the honeymoon. This time, he did smile. Brief. Faint. Real. It was the first real thing she'd seen in that damn dome. Later, they met in Kael's private quarters, which Mira had started calling the half-cage in her mind, opulent, spacious, and under 24-hour surveillance by precisely 6 invisible sensor arrays, 3 of which she'd managed to locate. Kael had changed into his informal robes, which meant only mildly intimidating instead of full regalia. Mira remained in her diplomatic jumpsuit, which was starting to look like rebellion by comparison. You look like you wanted to stab the ritual warden with her own staff, Kael said, offering her a drink. Only if I could make it look ceremonial. They sat. The lights in the room dimmed naturally as Verran Thal's orbit turned, casting violet shadows through the glasswork windows. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Mira broke the silence. Why do you stay here? Kael didn't flinch. You know why. I know what you tell others. I know the role. But why do you stay? You're smarter than this place. You're not some obedient symbol. No, he said. I'm a disobedient one. She leaned forward. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. He looked at the window like he wanted to climb through it. Do you know what happens to voices that speak too early in a Dominion? They vanish. Quietly. Elegantly. History doesn't remember arguments that never reach the air. So you wait. I wait, he admitted. I wait auntie. Kael exhaled. A long, tired breath. I thought I could outlive the system, he said, outlast it. Survive it long enough to speak again. But sometimes I think all I'm doing is rotting beautifully. Mira stood and walked toward the wall. She touched a panel, decorative, golden, patterned with Verran fractal geometry. Underneath it, barely visible, was her own inscription. I don't save symbols. I walk with people. He watched her. Then, slowly, he rose. Come with me. The tunnels beneath the compound were old, older than Kael, older than the monarchy. They had once been cooling systems, escape routes, forgotten architecture of the early Biosteel era. Now they were empty. Unmapped. Kael walked ahead, his steps precise, deliberate. Mira followed, heart racing. Where are we going? She asked. To see the truth, he said. The passage twisted, opened, narrowed again. At last, they entered a chamber lit by a single pulse crystal embedded in the ceiling. Around the walls were dozens of etched symbols, Verran, human, hybrid languages Mira didn't recognize. Messages. Testimonies. Names. This, Kael said, is where the first dissenters wrote. Before the war. Before the Accord. My great-aunt died building this place. My uncle was executed for showing it to a Terran envoy. Mira stepped closer to the wall, running her fingers across the etched names. They erased these people. They tried, Kael said, but they wrote anyway. And so I do too. He turned to her. I don't need you to rescue me, Mira. But if you're here, if we're both already in the fire, he reached into his robe and pulled out a small crystal sliver, encoded with pulsing threads. Then maybe we can start speaking in a voice they can't ignore. Mira took the sliver. Held it in her palm. Then smiled, not softly, not tragically, but the way someone smiles when the wind finally shifts. We don't need to scream, she said, we just need to be heard at the right frequency. When Mira Dalton returned to her chambers from the tunnels that night, there was a new robe hanging on her wall. Black and silver, lined with Verran glyphs of commitment and unity. It shimmered slightly in the low light, as if it had a pulse. A ceremonial gift, wrapped in expectation. She stared at it for a long minute. Then she opened her diplomatic case, pulled out a standard-issue Earth Alliance field scanner, and swept the fabric for embedded surveillance tech. She found 2 tracking threads, a woven acoustic relay, and, impressively, a gene-coded resonance tag designed to signal Kael's position within 10 meters. A couple's locator. Romantic. She folded the robe neatly and stuffed it into a sealed stasis pouch. Let them wonder what happened to it. If someone wanted to track her, they'd need to work harder. Mira wasn't here to be anyone's symbol anymore. And she definitely wasn't here to be their puppet. She sat down at her console, tapped into her diplomatic access terminal, and routed a signal through 3 proxy relays across trade channels. Then she did what no good emissary was supposed to do in enemy territory. She tried to send a message home. To Alliance Central Diplomatic Corps from Emissary Mira Dalton, Verran Thal Royal Compound requesting confirmation of intent. 1. Did Earth Alliance leadership fully disclose the status of Kael Verran as a political prisoner before enacting the treaty marriage clause? 2. Are there known conditions within the Verran royal family that violate interstellar diplomatic agreements on autonomy and coercion? 3. Under what circumstances, if any, does my legal status override continued complicity in domestic repression? This is not a formal withdrawal. This is a request for truth. She stared at the message. Then hit send. The system acknowledged transmission. Then, 1 minute later, she received a response. Not from a person. From the Office of Diplomatic Protocol Integrity. A pre-written directive. Message received. Your communication has been logged under Clause 1.4d, Emotional Fatigue Adjustment Window. Please refrain from speculative political analyse. Mira woke in her suite to the sound of something shattering. Her eyes snapped open. She reached for the compact transceiver hidden beneath her pillow, Standard Alliance issue, encrypted, illegal here. Then she stood, barefoot, silent. The air smelled wrong. Burnt copper and overheated circuitry. She crossed the room in 3 careful steps and paused by the mirrored wall that wasn't really a mirror, just an access panel with aspirations. Behind it, one of the palace's primary thermal conduits. It shouldn't be glowing. It was glowing now. She moved. 30 seconds later, the wall exploded inward. It wasn't a bomb, technically. It was a cavity compression disruptor, a non-standard black market tech that collapsed walls using focused vibration and a dose of unstable energy plasma. Expensive. Crude. Illegal in every known star system. Mira landed hard, shielding her face as shards of bioglass sliced the floor. And through the swirling mist of smoke and scorched circuitry came figures. 3 of them. Not palace guards. Not Dominion loyalists. These wore dark gray cloaks, anonymous, rough, utilitarian. Their faces were wrapped in dust filament masks. Their hands carried low-emission disruptors, the kind used by off-world assassins who wanted to make a point but not a mess. The point being, you weren't supposed to survive this long. Mira rolled, grabbed the support rail near her sleep console, and pivoted to her feet. No weapon. No shield. Just a slim diplomatic badge that glowed politely at assassins who definitely didn't care. The first attacker lunged. She stepped aside, fast, clean, let his momentum carry him forward, then used his own arm to swing him into the wall. He didn't go down, but he staggered. The second raised the weapon. She ducked behind the ceremonial sculpture, a terrible representation of interstellar unity now serving as surprisingly good cover, and shouted, "You're violating 6 treaties and 1 marriage contract." The third fired anyway. Classic. The palace went into lockdown 6 minutes later, which was 5 minutes and 40 seconds after Mira had personally disabled 2 of her attackers using improvised pressure points and a broken shard of bioglass. The third one got away, barely, and would probably regret it by the end of the day. Kael reached her suite before the guards. He looked, Mira thought, like someone halfway between horror and relief. "You're bleeding," he said. "I'm also alive." They were resistance. I recognized the insignia. "You mean the people who want to destroy the peace treaty and blame it on you?" "Yes." "Great," she said, wiping blood from her arm. "And here I thought it was just my charming personality attracting murder." He sat beside her while the medical drones scanned her vitals. His eyes didn't leave hers. "They want the accord to fail," he said. "But they want it to fail cleanly. Officially. Like it was never real to begin with." Mira nodded. "They kill me. Blame you. War resumes. And everyone gets to pretend it was never avoidable." Silence. Then Kael said, "You should leave." She laughed once, sharply. "Try again." "I'm serious." "So am I. You think I've come this far just to get shipped home in a body bag, or worse, a press release? If you stay, you'll die. If I leave, you'll die." They looked at each other. Neither blinked. 2 hours later, Mira stood before the High Tribunal, wrapped in a fresh diplomatic robe that hadn't yet been fitted with tracking threads. Her skin stung from the wound spray, and her ribs ached from the impact, but her voice was steady. "I was attacked by members of the Verran resistance. I defended myself. I didn't violate any codes." The tribunal, a semicircle of 6 officials cloaked in glass vein fabric, regarded her with the professional disinterest of organisms who had evolved past blinking. "You were not the target," said one. "It is likely the strike was symbolic." Mira tilted her head. "They used a compression disruptor to collapse my suite." "That's a very expensive symbol." Another official chimed in. "The right must proceed to deviate." Just Mira and Kael in the shadow of the ancestral crystal chamber, the place where the binding rite was meant to seal their public commitment. "You didn't have to say that," she told him. "I did. They'll come after you, they already have." Mira exhaled slowly. "Kael. I don't know how this ends, but I'm not walking away, not while I still have breath, not while your voice still matters." He looked at her then, not as a partner, not as an emissary, but as something rarer, an equal. "Mira," he said, "when I was a child, I used to dream of being free, but it was always in the abstract. Freedom was just not being here. Now I think maybe freedom is standing next to someone who sees the cage for what it is." She took his hand. "I see it," and together, they walked into the chamber, the place where monsters wore crowns and peace wore chains, ready to speak words that were never meant to be allowed, but they would be heard, because the monsters had names now, and Mira and Kael were not afraid to say them out loud. There's a specific kind of silence that falls when two people are about to lie in public, and both of them secretly wish it were the truth. Mira felt it settle over her like armor woven from regret and adrenaline. Kael stood beside her in the ceremonial staging chamber, bare feet on polished obsidian, a ceremonial sash tied across his chest, his posture perfectly upright and perfectly false. The binding rite would begin in 9 minutes, not the real rite, the one they'd rehearsed in secret, the one with the rewritten vows and honest intent. No, this was the public version, the one watched by 100,000 Verran citizens, streamed into every diplomatic archive in the Alliance, and reinforced by thousands of camera drones. Hovering just out of frame, the one they had to perform, because if they didn't, someone would die, probably both of them, probably slowly. "This is the dumbest thing I've ever done," Mira muttered as a Verran attendant adjusted the drape of her silks. Kael gave her a sideways glance, dumber than signing a treaty with a species known for ritual assassination. She grinned. "Second dumbest." Then, the attendant stepped back. Mira turned to Kael fully now. The robes they gave her shimmered like the surface of oil, beautiful, disorienting, and difficult to trust. The binding bands at her wrists were faintly warm, linked to a central harmonic pulse emitter designed to amplify the spiritual convergence of the bonded pair. Mira called it the wrist oven. Kael looked infuriatingly calm. Mira knew him well enough by now to spot the cracks, the slight tension in his jaw, the way his hands curled a fraction too tight at his sides. "Still time to run," she said, not quite joking. He met her eyes. "You don't run from something you're trying to change." "Poetic," she said, "and definitely how you end up dead. Then we die on our feet." The door opened. The signal came. It was time. The binding rite hall was vast and painfully radiant. Bioluminescent banners scrolled vertical lines of text, Verran unity scriptures and chosen excerpts from Alliance diplomacy charters, mashed together like someone had held a wedding between incompatible software licenses. Crowds filled the balconies, nobles, ministers, observers, screens flickered with live translations. Mira spotted at least 4 official assassins by the North Arch and 3 more disguised as flower attendants. Charming, the central dais shimmered with pulsing energy. They stepped forward, 2 figures cloaked in symbolism and political necessity. As they reached the central circle, the attending priest activated the binding sequence. Gold light curled around their wrists. A low hum rose from beneath the floor. Subsonic frequencies designed to resonate with the core of truth. Mira had never heard anything more ironic in her life. The priest raised his hands. "Let the union be witnessed." Kael turned to her. He took her hands. The glow intensified. And then, to Mira's total surprise, he leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't part of the script. It wasn't. They returned to the inner corridor to find a gift waiting. A single box, black, no markings. Kael opened it. Inside, a severed braid. Verran custom, a warrior's vow of vengeance, usually left on the bodies of the dishonored. Attached, a glyph etched into blood metal. "One of you dies before the sun turns." Mira stared at it. "Well, that's unsubtle." Kael closed the box. "Resistance? You sure it's not your charming family?" "No, they'd use poison, and better handwriting." She took a breath. "So what now?" He looked at her. "Now we make it harder to kill us." "How?" "We run, not away, through." Their escape wasn't about fleeing the Dominion. It was about infiltrating its blind spots. For every wall there was a passage. For every watcher there was a shadow. Kael knew the tunnels. Mira knew how to move unseen. Together, they disappeared from the ceremonial wing 5 minutes before the reception began. They reached the hidden chamber beneath the city. The wall of names, the messages, the forgotten truths etched by those who had tried and failed to make the Dominion listen. Mira added a line. "They kissed us on camera, then vanished, and no one could lie about the love they left behind." Kael looked at her. "You think love is the answer?" She shrugged. "I think it's a very inconvenient question." They didn't kiss again that night, but they stood close, and that was enough. The next day, the Dominion declared the rite a historic success. Mira and Kael had simply left for a private retreat. Security footage was conveniently corrupted. Witnesses were vague. No one could explain the timing, but the kiss, the image of it, circulated across hundreds of networks. A political marriage, yes, but one with emotion, one that inspired hope. One that couldn't be easily erased, and in the shadows of their world, a fire began to burn, not war, not rebellion, but something more dangerous, belief. The first official report claimed Kael Verran had left for a diplomatic sabbatical, the second said he was undergoing spiritual purification, the third, which arrived 36 hours after the binding rite, stated, without irony, that Kael had temporarily dematerialized as part of an elevated meditative rite known only to Verran nobility. Mira stared at that line for a full 5 seconds before whispering, "Oh, come on," in 4 different languages. Kael was missing, not spiritually, not metaphysically, just gone. No warning, no message, no trace. He was there, then he wasn't, like someone had deleted him from reality using the Dominion's highest level bureaucratic control plus Z. Mira knew what this was. It was an administrative coup, wrapped in a bow of etiquette. Her first instinct was to storm the High Tribunal chamber and demand answers. Her second instinct was to survive past breakfast. She chose option 3, weaponized diplomacy, summon the royal custodian of internal affairs. She told the attendant posted outside her suite. He bowed, hesitated, and asked, "Shall I request formal attire for the meeting?" "No," she said, "summon them fast enough that they don't have time to put on their ceremonial lies." 20 minutes later, Custodian Vine entered her suite with a look of someone who had just been scolded by 4 different departments but still planned to condescend about it. "You requested an audience, Emissary Dalton," Vine said, regretfully. "This is a sensitive time for the royal house. You're referring to the part where your prince was vanished." Vine blinked once, slowly. "Prince Kael is in seclusion, against his will." "There is no evidence to suggest." "Stop," she said. "Just stop." Vine stiffened. Mira walked to the window, where the view showed Verran in its twilight phase, the cityscape glowing like a wounded constellation. "Do you know what happens," she said, "when an Earth diplomat's bonded partner is forcibly removed during an active treaty period?" "There is no precedent." "Exactly, which means I get to choose the precedent." Vine's eye ridges twitched. "What are you implying?" "I'm implying that unless I get proof, actual, living, speaking proof, that Kael is safe, conscious, and not being interrogated in a crystal cell, I will invoke Section 13A of the Alliance Mutual Disclosure Act. That section was revoked 3 years ago. It was technically sunset, but my copy still has it bookmarked." Vine narrowed his eyes. "You would risk the accord over one man?" Mira turned to him. Her voice dropped. "I already did. You just weren't paying attention. Kael wasn't dead. That was the good news. The bad news was he had been taken to the Citadel of Reflection, a high-security contemplative isolation facility located beneath the Dominion's oldest temple, a place so secret it wasn't on maps and so symbolic it couldn't be spoken of publicly. The Dominion didn't torture its prisoners, they enlightened them, with silence, with time, with carefully modulated sonic dissonance generators that didn't leave bruises but could shatter a mind if calibrated wrong. Mira didn't have clearance, she didn't have allies inside. What she did have was a very inconvenient amount of public support. The image of Kael kissing her, raw, unscripted, real, had gone viral across at least 9 systems. It had been picked up by human analysts, romanticized by alien poets, and turned into an experimental dance sequence on 3 separate Alliance cultural feeds, and that made her valuable. She could speak, loudly, publicly, and the Dominion couldn't kill her without unraveling the exact myth they had spent decades trying to fabricate. So she used it. She sent a statement to the Interstellar Accord Council. She filed a formal query to the Verran diplomatic liaison on Earth. She gave a personal reflection to the Dominion's internal press. Each message delivered the same core idea, wrapped in different diplomatic flavors. If Kael Verran does not reappear within 48 hours, I will assume the treaty has been violated and begin procedures to nullify the bond under emergency ethical protocol. She didn't have the authority to do that, but she sounded like she did, and sometimes, in politics, that was enough. On hour 36, they brought Kael back. He was thinner, paler, but standing. And his eyes, gray, translucent, haunted, still held defiance. They met in her quarters, alone. No attendants, no monitors, not this time. He said nothing at first, just sat on the edge of the divan, hands clasped tightly in his lap. Mira knelt in front of him. "What did they say to you?" she asked softly. Kael looked past her. "Nothing." "What did they do?" "They reminded me that truth is not welcome until the system is ready to process it." "That's a very polite way of saying they tortured you." "I prefer attempted to recalibrate my expectations." She reached out and took his hand. "Are you still you?" His grip tightened. "I'm still us." That night, they spoke for hours, not about escape, not about survival, but about what came next. "The myth is too strong now," Kael said. "They can't erase it, not without tearing their own narrative apart." Mira nodded. "So we use it." "To do what?" "To create space. For us. For others." She looked him in the eye. "We play the part, for a while, smile, wave, whisper at dinners, but we plant things, ideas, codes, cracks in the walls. And when they come for us again, they won't come as fast." Kael laughed, dry and hollow. "So we buy time with lies." "No," she said. "We buy time with stories, and then we tell better ones." The next morning, Mira issued a public message. "Prince Kael and I are grateful for the concern shown by our peoples. We have emerged from our period of private reflection stronger and more unified than ever. The accord lives not only in words, but in shared resolve." The Dominion approved the message instantly. The Alliance reposted it within the hour. No one noticed the small symbol she embedded at the end, a glyph from Kael's hidden wall, encoded into the formatting. To most, it looked decorative. To those who knew, it meant, the fire has not gone out, only hidden. The idea wasn't Mira's, not exactly. It came from a Verran child's book, one Kael used to read aloud in the tunnels when he wanted to remember that joy had once existed here. In the story, a mute boy falls in love with the sound of a bell, and so he learns to shape silence into words no one else understands. The ending is ambiguous, as most Verran stories are, but the theme had stuck with Mira. You don't need a weapon when you have a story powerful enough to reshape the rules. And so, they wrote one, together, on an encrypted sliver crystal, using a modified dialect known only to 3 dead scholars and 1 stubborn prince. It was, technically, a new treaty, shorter, cleaner, no ceremonial language, no ancestral clauses, just 27 lines of mutual consent, civic commitment, and shared vision for post-conflict unity. Kael called it the Living Accord. Mira called it the last honest document anyone will let us write. They knew it wouldn't last long. The Dominion would suppress it. The Alliance would file it under interesting but politically inconvenient. The public would never see it unless someone delivered it with fireworks, metaphorical or otherwise. So Mira suggested fireworks. Kael frowned. "Literal?" "No. Symbolic. But large enough to be mistaken for treason." "Good," he said. "I missed treason." The Council of Accord Oversight, an interspecies wet blanket of a bureaucracy that existed solely to notarize what had already been decided, was scheduled to convene in 3 days. Mira and Kael were invited to speak, publicly, in front of every major galactic power, on record, archived for all time. It was supposed to be ceremonial, smiles, nods, scripted remarks about progress and the beauty of diplomacy. They were going to hijack it. The plan was simple. 1. Bypass the official speech with a live override crystal. 2. Activate projection mode from the central dais. 3. Display the Living Accord. 4. Read it aloud, together. High treason, technically. Also, possibly the most romantic thing either of them had ever done. Mira spent the next 2 days pretending not to be staging a diplomatic mutiny. She attended dinners, waved at press drones, smiled politely when asked about their beautiful binding energy, and avoided eye contact with people who looked too closely at her wrists. Kael played his role, too, stoic, dutiful, princely. He received gifts, quoted ancestors, and kissed her hand in public like it was an act of prayer. It would have been nauseating if it hadn't also been the only thing keeping them alive. Because beneath the performance, everyone knew. The right had become too popular. Too many citizens had seen the kiss. Too many had felt something genuine pulse through the tightly controlled channels of propaganda. And in places where genuine things appeared, control systems started to glitch. That made Mira and Kael dangerous. Dangerous people in the Dominion didn't get warning shots. They got rewritten. Or erased. The night before the council session, Kael received a visitor. His sister. Princess Ceres Verran, third-born heir, former intelligence attaché, and unofficial coordinator of everything that officially did not exist. She arrived in civilian garb with 2 guards she never acknowledged. "Mira," she said when she entered, "you're shorter than I expected. And you're less terrifying." Slightly. They sat in the courtyard. Kael made tea. The air smelled like citrus and pressure. Ceres cut to the point. "I know what you're planning." Kael said nothing. "I'm not here to stop you. But you should know, if you go through with it, Father will activate protocol fracture." Mira blinked. "What's that?" Kael answered. "It's the emergency measure for high-level public betrayal. It voids the succession line and classifies the offender as a pathogen. Which," Ceres added, "grants the military full authority to neutralize you with zero oversight." "And me?" Mira asked. "The Alliance will disavow you. You'll be labeled compromised. Likely detained for debrief, or traded quietly in a political exchange." "Romantic," Mira muttered. "Necessary," Ceres replied. "Unless you don't go through with it." Kael set the tea down. "You know I can't do that." Ceres sighed. "I know. Just wanted to give you one last chance to lie." She stood. To Mira, she said, "He's always been like this, you know. A rebel without the decency to wear leather." "Thanks for the warning." Ceres smiled, sad and sharp. "Don't die too publicly. It's messy." Then she was gone. The council chamber was a spire of glass and light suspended above the Capitol's core. It had no walls, only force fields, and no ceiling, only stars. A perfect place to deliver a betrayal. Kael and Mira stood on the central platform, robes perfect, faces neutral. Dignitaries from 19 worlds watched from elevated seats. Holodrones hovered. Interpreters whispered into 1,000 ears. The opening remarks concluded. Kael stepped forward. The crowd expected diplomacy. Instead, Kael said, "We have chosen to speak freely." A murmur. Mira followed him, crystal sliver in hand. She slid it into the override panel. The projections behind them flickered. And then, for the first time in Dominion history, an unauthorized document appeared in public view. Kael read first. "We speak not from the throne, nor the embassy, but from the bond we chose freely." Mira followed. "Let this accord live not because it was signed, but because it was believed. Together, we do not promise unity. We promise honesty. And from that, may peace be born." The chamber froze. Not in confusion. In recognition. This wasn't rebellion. This was belief. The military responded within 4 minutes. Too slow. By the time the drones moved, the message had already been captured, transmitted, remixed, and backed up in 50 languages. The living accord became a virus of sincerity, too fast to contain, too elegant to discredit. Kael and Mira were escorted out by guards. But not in chains. Because even the Dominion knew, it was too late. They were already symbols. And symbols don't bleed. They echo. The Dominion didn't collapse. The Alliance didn't declare war. No statues were pulled down, no governments overthrown, no crowds rising in unison to chant freedom beneath a binary moon. What happened was quieter. What happened was worse. The Dominion paused. Not publicly. Not officially. But Mira could feel it in the hallways of power, the way conversations became clipped, the way ministers whispered before speaking, the way eyes darted not just to Kael, but to her. Like people were looking for an instruction manual to a future no one had ordered. The living accord had broken something. Not the system, but the certainty behind it. And in a dominion that was almost more dangerous, Kael was officially under review. Which translated to, no public appearances, no formal duties, and absolutely no unsupervised access to anything sharp, subversive, or romantic. Mira was offered immediate extradition for her safety, a term now so flexible it could have meant house arrest or a diplomatic rendition. She refused. Politely. Then firmly. Then with a 7-page legal brief that used the phrase "pursuant to your own damn charter" twice. They couldn't touch her. Not yet. So they watched. So she waited. Kael came to her in the middle of the night. No guards. No protocol. Just him, barefoot, carrying a day top hat and an expression that looked halfway between relief and grief. "They are offering me a deal," he said. Mira, still in her Alliance issue sleep uniform, set up. "Define deal. I renounce authorship of the Living Accord. Blame it on unauthorized emotional influence. Claim a neural lapse from sonic resonance, say it wasn't me." She blinked. "They want you to say your kiss was a side effect." He didn't smile. "If I do that, they'll let me disappear quietly. No execution. No exile. Just quiet retirement. Somewhere far. Somewhere safe. I could live." Mira leaned forward. "And if you don't?" He met her eyes. "I stop being Kael Verran, and start being a problem they can't afford to leave breathing." She said nothing for a moment. Then, "Do you want to live like that?" In silence, pretending none of this was real. Kael's voice was quiet. "I've done it before. It's survivable. Surviving isn't living." "I know." They sat in a silence together, which was ironic, because both of them had spent their entire lives being shaped by silence. Diplomatic. Political. Personal. Now it just felt like another cage. Kael slid the day top hat across the bed. A message was already written. "I, Kael Verran, acted of my own volition, but recognized that my actions may have unintentionally caused public confusion." Mira stopped reading. "Kael. Don't." He looked exhausted. "I want to protect you." "That's not your job." "No," he said, "but it's what I want to do. Because I love you. And love, I'm learning, is mostly just wanting someone else to survive in a world that wants them gone." She reached for his hand. Held it tightly. "You know what I want." "What?" "I want you to tell the truth. Even if it burns the room down." Kael exhaled. And then deleted the message. The fallout began the next day. A public leak from an anonymous Verran official confirmed the existence of protocol fracture. Protests broke out in the outer districts, not violent, but deliberate. Silence strikes. Hundreds standing in public squares, not moving, not speaking. The Living Accord was downloaded over 4 million times. In response, the Dominion's ruling council issued a clarification. They reaffirmed their commitment to the official treaty and blamed unauthorized narrative deviations for the confusion. Which was a lot of words that meant, "We can't kill you, but we'd really like to." Mira received an official summons. This time, not to apologize. To witness. They wanted her to stand beside Kael as he gave his statement. The one where he was supposed to fold. She dressed in plain clothes. Not the robes. Not the silk. Not the armor. She walked into the council chamber with Kael beside her. He wore a simple black tunic. No medals. No symbols. Just truth. The hall was full. Press. Ministers. Soldiers. The Speaker of the Council addressed them both. "Prince Verran. Emissary Dalton. You have requested a final statement before judgment. Speak. Kael stepped forward. Then Mira did something no one expected. She stepped ahead of him and spoke first. Before he speaks, she said, I want you to remember what he risked to be here. He chose love. Not politics. Not performance. Love. And that, more than any vote or treaty, is what makes a system legitimate. She turned to him. You don't have to say anything. He smiled. Then said everything. Kael didn't renounce. He didn't apologize. He recited the first lines of the Living Accord again, this time without ceremony. We do not promise unity. We promise honesty. And from that, may peace be born. And when they tried to silence him, cut the feed, mute the stream, Mira held up a small crystal device. It pulsed and broadcasted everything live. Because she had planned for this. And Kael had trusted her. And the world, watching, didn't see rebels or traitors. They saw two people who told the truth, and stayed to face what followed. The Dominion didn't fall. But it shifted. Quietly. Carefully. Certain officials retired. Others stepped forward with new ideas. The Living Accord was never officially adopted, but it became required reading in 3 academies and a core text in 1 revolutionary school curriculum. As for Kael and Mira, they weren't exiled. But they weren't safe either. So they left. Together. Not running. Just moving forward. They settled on a small moon orbiting a neutral system. Far from power. Close to each other. Some days, they taught. Other days, they built. Every day, they told the story. Not because it was perfect. But because it had mattered. And because somewhere, someone else was wondering if love could survive politics. And they deserved to know, yes. It could. Especially when you rewrote the treaty together. They never signed the Living Accord. Not officially. It was never printed on banners, never quoted in speeches, never sealed with ceremonial wax. But it spread. Quietly. Relentlessly. Through whispered conversations. Through students who memorized its words. Through leaders who saw, even for a second, that peace doesn't come from protocol, but from the people brave enough to rewrite it. Mira Dalton and Kael Verran didn't change the galaxy in one speech. They changed it by surviving each other, by choosing to stay, to speak, to believe. And though their names might one day be forgotten in the machinery of history, the words they said, together, will remain. We do not promise unity. We promise honesty. And from that, may peace be born. Not a perfect ending. But a real one. And sometimes, in a galaxy held together by fragile things, that's the most powerful story of all.